The recording light blinked red in the small studio. Yanara checked her notes one more time and looked at the old soldier sitting across from her. Kethvorin was not what she had expected. The famous war hero looked tired. His gray skin had faded to almost white with age. One of his forearms was made of metal, a replacement for the one he had lost long ago. His eyes, once sharp and golden, now seemed clouded with memories he could not escape. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview," Yanara said. She was young, barely 200 cycles old. The war had ended before she was born. To her generation, it was history. To Kethvorin, it was something else entirely. "You wanted to know about the human front," Kethvorin said. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. "I am not sure you are ready to hear it." Yanara leaned forward. "The people deserve to know the truth. The war ended 30 years ago. But no one talks about what really happened. Why did so many veterans come back different? Why do some of them refuse to speak at all?" Kethvorin was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his metal arm and flexed the fingers slowly. "Because some truths are too heavy to carry alone, and some memories never fade, no matter how much time passes." He turned to face her directly. "I was a commander in the Collective's elite assault division. Before the human front, I had fought in 23 campaigns. I helped conquer 11 species. I was decorated 7 times. I believed I understood war." "And then you went to Earth," Yanara said. "And then I went to Earth," he repeated. The words seemed to cause him physical pain. "We had conquered over 200 species by then. The Galactic Collective was the greatest power in known space. When our scouts found the humans, we laughed. They were primitive. They had barely left their own planet. Their weapons were simple. Their ships were slow. Our analysts said the war would last 3 rotations at most. How long did it actually last?" Kethvorin closed his eyes. 11 years. Yanara stared at him. She had read the official reports, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel different. More real. More terrible. "How is that possible?" she asked. "The Collective had thousands of warships. Millions of soldiers. The humans had nothing compared to that." "That is what we thought," Kethvorin said. "That is what we believed, right up until the moment we landed on their moon. And then we learned how wrong we were." He stood up slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the twin suns of Valcoria were setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. But Kethvorin was not looking at the sunset. He was looking at something far away, something only he could see. "I remember the day we arrived in their system," he said. "I stood on the bridge of our flagship and looked at their little blue planet. It was beautiful. Green and blue and white. So small. So fragile. I felt almost sad that we had to take it from them." He turned back to face Yanara. "The humans sent us a message when we entered their space. Just one message. Our translators had learned their language from their broadcast signals. The message said, 'We do not want war. But if you bring war to us, we will end it.' What did the Collective do?" "We laughed," Kethvorin said. "Our admiral played the message for the whole fleet. Everyone laughed. How could these primitive creatures threaten us? They had no idea what was coming." He sat back down, his metal arm clicking against the chair. "The first battle was on their moon. Luna, they called it. We sent 5,000 soldiers to take their station there. It was supposed to be a simple operation. Secure the moon, establish a base, then move to the planet. What happened?" Kethvorin looked at her with those clouded eyes. "We won. We always won. But that was the day I learned that winning against humans was not the same as winning against other species." He paused, gathering his thoughts. The station had 300 human defenders, 300 against 5,000. By every measure of war, they should have surrendered. Any other species would have. It was logical. It was reasonable. Fighting meant death. Surrender meant survival. But they did not surrender, Yanara guessed. "No," Kethvorin said. "They did not. They fought for every room, every hallway, every inch of that station. When they ran out of ammunition, they fought with knives. When their knives broke, they fought with their hands. When they could no longer stand, they crawled toward us and kept fighting. His voice had grown quiet. I killed a human that day. He was already wounded. He had been shot twice in the chest. He could barely breathe, but when I came around the corner, he threw himself at me. He knew he would die. He knew he could not win, but he attacked anyway, just to give his friends 3 more seconds to escape. Yanara felt cold. Why? Why would anyone do that? That is the question that haunted me for 11 years, Kethvoran said. That is the question that still haunts me today. We had conquered so many species, and none of them had ever acted this way. When defeat was certain, they surrendered. When survival required submission, they submitted. It was logical. It was how the universe worked. He leaned forward, his golden eyes suddenly sharp. But humans do not follow logic. They follow something else. Something we had no name for. Something that terrified us more than any weapon they possessed. What was it? Yanara asked. Kethvoran was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. We thought we were predators, he said. We went to their world believing we would hunt them. We believed they would run and hide and beg for mercy like all the others. But we were wrong. So terribly wrong. He looked at her with an expression she could not read. Pain, perhaps, or fear, or something deeper than both. We learned that day that we were not the predators. We were the prey. We just did not know it yet. The recording light continued to blink. Yanara realized she had been holding her breath. She let it out slowly and looked at the old soldier across from her. Tell me more, she said. Tell me everything. Kethvoran nodded slowly. Very well. But remember, young one, you asked for this. You asked for the truth. And the truth about humans is something you will never be able to forget. He closed his eyes and began to remember. Kethvoran's mind drifted back across the decades. The studio around him faded away, and he was young again, strong again, standing on the surface of Earth's moon with blood on his armor and confusion in his heart. Luna Station was supposed to fall in 6 hours, he told Yanara. Our strategists had calculated every variable. We had better weapons, better armor, better numbers. 15 of us for every one of them. The math was simple. The outcome was certain. He paused, remembering the cold gray dust beneath his feet. The black sky above. The distant blue marble of Earth hanging in the darkness. We breached the outer walls at dawn, their time. Our troops poured through the gaps like water through broken stone. The first level fell quickly. The second level fell quickly. We thought we were proving our analysts right. But something changed, Yanara said. Everything changed, Kethvoran replied. On the third level, we met Commander Daniel Price. He spoke the human name carefully, as if it held weight, as if it meant something important. Daniel Price was not a large human. He was not particularly strong or fast. By our standards, he was unremarkable. But when we breached the third level, he was standing in the middle of the corridor, just standing there, waiting for us. Kethvoran shook his head slowly. We had killed dozens of his soldiers. We outnumbered him 100 to 1. Any sane creature would have retreated. Any logical being would have found another position, bought more time, preserved their life for a better opportunity. What did he do? He smiled at us, Kethvoran said. I will never forget that smile. It was not the smile of a creature that was afraid. It was the smile of someone who knew something we did not. And then he spoke. He closed his eyes, and the words came back to him as clear as the day they were spoken. He said, You have come a long way to die. Yanara leaned forward. And then he attacked. 1 human against 100 of us. He killed 3 soldiers before we could react. He moved like nothing I had ever seen. Fast, precise, brutal. When we finally brought him down, he had killed 11 of us and wounded 20 more. 1 human did all that? 1 human. Kethvorin confirmed. But he was not alone. As he fell, his soldiers came out of hiding. They had been waiting in the walls, in the ceiling, under the floor. They had hidden themselves in places we never thought to look, and when their commander gave his life, they attacked. He remembered the chaos of that moment. The screaming, the gunfire, the terrible efficiency of the human ambush. There was a woman among them, Lieutenant Megan Harris. She commanded the hidden soldiers. While we focused on Daniel Price, she had positioned her people perfectly. They hit us from every direction. We lost 200 soldiers in the first minute. How did you survive? I do not know, Kethvorin admitted. I truly do not know. There were moments when I should have died. Moments when human weapons were pointed directly at me, but something always happened. Another soldier would step in front of me. An explosion would knock me aside. It was as if the universe was keeping me alive so I could witness what humans truly were. He stood up again, pacing slowly across the studio floor. The battle lasted 18 hours. 18 hours for a station that should have fallen in 6. When it was finally over, we had won. The humans were dead or captured. The station was ours, but we had lost over 2,000 soldiers. 2,000 against 300. That seems impossible, Yanara said. It was impossible, Kethvorin agreed. But it happened. And it kept happening. Every battle. Every engagement. We would win, but we would bleed. We would take our objectives, but we would pay prices we never expected. He stopped pacing and looked at her. There was a moment during the battle that I have never been able to forget. We had cornered a group of wounded humans in a storage room. They were dying. They had no chance of survival. We could have simply waited for them to bleed out. But they did not wait to die, Yanara guessed. No. They did not. One of them, a sergeant named Kevin Brooks, had been shot in the stomach. He could barely move. But when we entered the room, he stood up. He had explosives strapped to his chest. Enough to collapse the entire section. Kethvorin's voice dropped to a whisper. He looked at me, directly at me, and he said, "This is for my friends." Then, he pressed the button. The studio was silent. Yanara did not know what to say. The explosion killed him, Kethvorin continued. It killed the other wounded humans. It killed 300 of our soldiers. It collapsed tunnels we needed for our supply lines. One dying human, who could have simply let death take him peacefully, chose instead to take as many of us as possible. Why? Yanara asked. Why would he do that? That is what I asked myself for years, Kethvorin said. And eventually, I understood. He did it because of love. Not romantic love. Something deeper. Something more powerful. He loved his fellow humans. He loved them so much that he was willing to burn himself alive to protect them. To avenge them. To ensure that his death meant something. He sat back down heavily. We had never encountered anything like this. The collective was built on logic, on efficiency, on survival. We did not sacrifice ourselves for each other. When a battle was lost, we retreated. When survival required abandoning our wounded, we abandoned them. It was practical. It was rational. But humans do not think that way, Yanara said. Humans do not think that way. Kethvorin confirmed. They carry their wounded. They go back for their dead. They fight for creatures they have never met simply because those creatures are also human. It defied everything we understood about war. He looked at his metal arm again. After the battle, we intercepted a broadcast from the human fleet. Their admiral was speaking to the survivors on Earth, telling them what had happened at Luna Station. Telling them that Daniel Price and Kevin Brooks and Megan Harris and all the others had died fighting. What did the message say? Kethvorin recited it from memory. It said, "Our heroes have fallen. But they did not fall in vain. They showed the enemy what humanity is made of. And now, we will show them more. We do not surrender. We do not forget. And we do not forgive." He met Yanara's eyes. When I heard those words, I felt something I had never felt before in all my years of war. I felt afraid. Not of their weapons, not of their ships, but of their spirit. Of their refusal to accept defeat even when defeat was certain. And that fear never went away, Yanara said softly. No, Kethvorin replied. It never went away. It only grew stronger. Because Luna Station was just the beginning. The humans were just getting started. And the worst was yet to come. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in his mind, he was still on that moon. Still surrounded by the bodies of friends and enemies. Still wondering how such a small species could fight so hard. Shall I continue? He asked. Yanara nodded. She was not sure she wanted to hear more. But she knew she needed to. Then let me tell you about Chicago, Kethvorin said. Let me tell you about the day I learned that human soldiers were not the only ones who would fight to the death. Kethvorin closed his eyes and let the memories take him back. 2 years into the war, the great human city called Chicago. Ruins and fire, and the smell of death everywhere. We thought it would be different on the planet, he said. We had broken their military. Their fleets were scattered. Their armies were in retreat. Our commanders told us that the civilian population would surrender. That was how it worked with other species. Once the soldiers fell, the people gave up. But the humans did not give up, Yanara said. The humans did not know how to give up, Kethvorin replied. When we landed in Chicago, we expected to find frightened civilians waiting to submit. Instead, we found a city that had turned itself into a weapon. He remembered the first day of the occupation. The empty streets, the silent buildings, the feeling that thousands of eyes were watching from the shadows. There was a woman named Laura Chen. She was not a soldier. She was a nurse. She worked in a hospital before the war. When we arrived, she was still there. The hospital had been bombed, half of it had collapsed, but she had moved her patients to the basement and kept treating them. Why did she not evacuate? Because her patients could not be moved, Kethvorin said. Some of them were too wounded. Some of them were too old. Some of them were children. She stayed because leaving would mean abandoning them to die. He shook his head slowly. When our soldiers found the hospital, they expected to find it empty. Instead, they found Laura Chen standing in the doorway. She was small. She had no weapons. She had not slept in days. But she stood there and refused to move. What happened? Our soldiers hesitated. Kethvorin admitted. I was there. I saw it happen. These were hardened warriors who had killed thousands. Kethvorin, but something about this small human woman made them stop. She looked at them with no fear in her eyes, only determination, only love for the people behind her. He paused, remembering her face. The dark circles under her eyes, the blood on her clothes, the absolute refusal to step aside. One of my soldiers asked me what to do. I did not have an answer. We had protocols for enemy combatants. We had protocols for surrendering civilians. We had no protocol for a creature who would die before moving from a doorway. Did you kill her? No, Kethvorin said. We walked away. We told our commanders the hospital was empty. It was the first time I had ever lied in a military report. But I could not order her death. I could not kill someone whose only crime was loving strangers too much to abandon them. Yanara stared at him. You protected her. I did not protect her, Kethvorin said quickly. I simply chose not to destroy her. There is a difference. But yes, in that moment, something changed inside me. I began to question what we were doing on this planet. I began to wonder if we were the invaders, or the villains. He stood up and walked to the window again. The suns had fully set now. Stars were appearing in the purple sky. Laura Chen survived the war. I learned that later. She kept her hospital running for the entire occupation. She saved over 200 lives. Humans. And later, even some of our own wounded soldiers who had been left behind. She did not care what species they were. She only cared that they were hurt and needed help. That is remarkable, Yanara said. That is human, Kethvaran corrected. But she was not the only one. Let me tell you about Nathan Gray. He returned to his seat. Nathan Gray was 17 years old. A child. By human standards. His parents had been killed in the initial bombing. His home had been destroyed. He had every reason to hide, to run, to find safety somewhere far from the fighting. But he did not run. He became a warrior, Kethvaran said. Not a soldier. The human military did not accept children. But Nathan Gray did not need their acceptance. He knew the underground tunnels of Chicago better than anyone. He had explored them as a boy, and he used that knowledge to kill us. His voice grew heavy. I lost 47 soldiers to Nathan Gray and his group of young fighters. They would appear from nowhere, strike hard, and vanish before we could respond. We called them ghosts. We feared them more than we feared the human military. Children fighting a war, Yanara said softly. Children protecting their home, Kethvaran replied. There is a difference. Nathan Gray did not fight because he wanted glory or medals. He fought because strangers were hurting his people. He fought because no one else would. He fought because the alternative was to watch everything he loved be destroyed. He was quiet for a moment, lost in memory. There was a day near the end of the siege. We had cornered a group of human refugees. Families. Old people. Children. They were hiding in a basement, and we had found them. My commander ordered us to clear the building. What happened? We went in, Kethvaran said, and we found them huddled together in the darkness, terrified, helpless. And then a human mother stood up. She was holding a baby in her arms, a tiny thing, barely a year old. His voice cracked slightly. She walked toward us. She walked toward armed soldiers who had killed her friends and neighbors. And she held out her baby. She was offering her child to us. I do not understand, Yanara said. Neither did I, Kethvaran admitted. Not at first. But then I realized what she was doing. She knew she would die. She had accepted that. But she thought that maybe, just maybe, we would spare her child. She was willing to give her baby to monsters in the hope that those monsters had enough mercy to let it live. Tears formed in his golden eyes. In all my years of war, I had never seen anything like that. I had never witnessed love so pure, so desperate, so absolute. She was not begging for her own life. She was begging for her child's. What did you do? I ordered my soldiers to stand down, Kethvaran said. I told them we had found nothing. I let those people go. All of them. The mother, the baby, the old people, the families. I watched them disappear into the tunnels, and I knew that I had just committed treason against the collective. He wiped his eyes with his real hand. But I did not care. Something had broken inside me. Something that could never be fixed. I had seen what humans were willing to do for each other, and I knew that we could never truly conquer them. We could kill them. We could destroy their cities and burn their world, but we could never break their spirit. Is that why none of you returned the same? Yanara asked. It is part of it, Kethvaran said. The siege of Chicago lasted 8 months. We won, eventually. We took the city. But every soldier who fought there came away changed. We had seen things we could not explain. We had witnessed courage we could not match. We had learned that there were creatures in the universe who valued love more than survival. He looked at her with exhausted eyes. Captain Scott Palmer commanded the human resistance in Chicago. He was wounded early in the siege. He could barely walk. But he refused to evacuate. He stayed in that broken city, leading his people until the very end. When we finally captured him, he was more bone than flesh. He had given everything he had. What happened to him? He died in custody, Kethvaran said. But before he died, he said something to me. Something I have never forgotten. He said, "You think you have won, but you have only made us angry, and you have not yet seen what angry humans can do." A chill ran down Yanara's spine. He was right, was he not? Kethvaran nodded slowly. He was right. Chicago was just the middle of the war. The humans were still learning, still adapting, still finding new ways to fight back. And when they finally struck back with everything they had, the galaxy would never be the same. He leaned forward. Shall I tell you about the turning point? Shall I tell you about the day humans stopped being prey and became predators? Yanara nodded, unable to speak. Then listen carefully, Kethvaren said. Because this is where the story becomes truly terrifying. Kethvaren's voice grew quieter as he began the next part of his story. The turning point. The moment when everything changed. For 7 years, we believed we were winning, he said. We had taken their moon. We had occupied their major cities. We controlled their skies and their seas. Every metric showed that victory was approaching. Flest, but something was wrong, Yanara guessed. Something was very wrong, Kethvaran confirmed. We did not realize it at the time, but the humans were not just fighting us. They were learning from us, studying us, taking apart every piece of our technology they could find and figuring out how it worked. He shook his head in disbelief. When we conquered the Telvanni, it took them 400 years to understand our basic weapons. The Korathi needed 2 centuries. The humans did it in 5 years. 5 years to reverse engineer technology that was thousands of years ahead of their own. How is that possible? I still do not fully understand, Kethvaran admitted. But humans have a quality we had never seen before. They are obsessed with learning, with understanding, with taking things apart and putting them back together. They do not accept that something is beyond their comprehension. They simply work harder until they comprehend it. He leaned back in his chair. Dr. Paul Whitman was one of their scientists. Before the war, he studied something called theoretical physics. When the war began, he turned his mind to our technology. He led a team of researchers in a secret facility deep underground. They worked without rest, without hope, without any guarantee of success. And they succeeded. They more than succeeded, Kethvaran said. They created weapons we had never imagined. They modified our own technology and turned it against us. And they developed something that changed the war forever. What was it? Kethvaran was quiet for a long moment. It was a biological agent. A chemical compound that targeted our neural networks. It did not kill us. That would have been merciful. Instead, it caused pain. Unimaginable, unbearable pain that could last for hours. Yanara stared at him. The humans created a torture weapon? They created a deterrent, Kethvaran said carefully. By year 7, the humans were desperate. They were losing. Their population had been cut in half. Their planet was burning. They needed something that would make us afraid. Something that would make us hesitate before attacking. He met her eyes. And it worked. When our soldiers learned about the pain agent, morale collapsed. Warriors who had faced death without flinching suddenly refused to advance. The fear of that weapon was worse than the fear of dying. That seems cruel, Yanara said. War is cruel, Kethvaran replied. We had burned their cities, killed their children, destroyed everything they loved, and they responded by showing us that they could be just as terrible as we were, perhaps more terrible. Because while we killed efficiently, they learned to make us suffer. He stood up and began pacing again. But the pain agent was only part of the turning point. The real change came from Admiral Lisa Monroe. 1-4. Who was she? She was the commander of what remained of the human fleet, Kethvaran said. By year 7, the humans had only a handful of ships left. Old vessels, damaged and rebuilt dozens of times. Against our armada, they should have been nothing. Insects to be swatted aside. He stopped pacing and turned to face Yanara. But Admiral Monroe did not think like other commanders. She did not try to match our strength. She found our weaknesses instead. She studied our tactics, our formations, our psychology. And then she attacked. What happened? The Battle of the Pacific Trench, Kethvaran said. That was what they called it. Our main fleet was stationed above their largest ocean. We thought we were safe. We had thousands of ships, millions of soldiers. The humans had nothing that could threaten us. His voice dropped. Admiral Monroe sent her fleet at us in what appeared to be a desperate suicide attack. Our commanders laughed. They thought the humans had finally gone mad. They ordered our ships to hold position and wait for the easy victory. It was a trap, Yanara said. It was a masterpiece of deception, Kethvaran replied. The ships we saw were decoys. Empty vessels controlled remotely. While we focused on them, the real human fleet came from behind, using our own sensor blind spots against us. They had learned exactly how our equipment worked, and they used that knowledge perfectly. He closed his eyes, remembering the chaos of that day. Captain Ryan Torres led the main attack squadron. He was a pilot. A good one. Perhaps the best the humans had. When his ship was damaged during the battle, he did not retreat. He aimed his vessel directly at our flagship's engine core. He crashed his ship deliberately? He sacrificed himself deliberately, Kethvaran corrected. As his ship was falling toward us, he sent one final transmission. Our communication officers intercepted it. He said, "Tell my daughter I kept my promise." Yanara felt tears forming in her eyes. What was the promise? I do not know, Kethvaran admitted. I never found out. But those words haunted me. This human was about to die, and his last thought was not of himself. It was of his child. Of a promise he had made to someone he loved. He sat back down heavily. Captain Torres destroyed our flagship. The explosion crippled 3 other vessels. In the confusion, Admiral Monroe's fleet tore through our formation. We lost 40% of our ships in less than an hour. That was the turning point. That was the beginning of the end, Kethvaran said. After the Battle of the Pacific Trench, we were no longer winning. The humans had proven they could hurt us. Really hurt us. And once they knew that, they became relentless. He rubbed his metal arm absently. I lost my real arm in the battles that followed. A human soldier threw a grenade into my position. I was lucky to survive. Many of my friends did not. How did the war continue after that? It continued for 4 more years, Kethvaran said. But the nature of it had changed. We were no longer conquering. We were surviving. The humans pushed us back, kilometer by kilometer. They retook their cities, they reclaimed their skies, and they made us pay for every moment we had spent on their world. He looked at her with haunted eyes. Do you know what the worst part was? It was not the dying. It was not the pain. It was the way they looked at us. What do you mean? Before the turning point, humans looked at us with fear, Kethvaran explained. They were afraid of us, as they should have been. We were bigger, stronger, more advanced. But after the turning point, the fear was gone. In its place was something else. What? Contempt, Kethvaran said. They looked at us like we were the monsters, like we were the villains of their story, and eventually, I believed them. I looked in the mirror and saw what they saw. I saw a creature who had invaded someone else's home, killed their families, destroyed their world, and called it glory. He was silent for a long moment. That is when I started having nightmares. Not of human weapons or human traps, but of human eyes, staring at me, judging me, finding me guilty. You felt ashamed, Yanara said softly. I felt something I had never felt before, Kethvaran replied. Something the collective had no word for. The humans called it remorse. The understanding that you have done something terrible, and that no amount of victory can undo it. He leaned forward. That is why none of us returned the same. Not because of what the humans did to our bodies, but because of what they did to our souls. They showed us who we really were, and we could never unsee it. Yanara was quiet, processing everything she had heard. Finally, she asked, How did the war end? Kethvaran nodded slowly. That is the final part of the story. The end of the war, and the beginning of everything that came after. He took a deep breath. Let me tell you about Chris Miller. Let me tell you about the human who broke me completely. The studio felt smaller now. The recording light still blinked red. But Yanara had forgotten about the documentary. She was lost in Keth Varan's story. Lost in a war that had ended before she was born. The Collective Council offered peace in the 11th year, Keth Varan said. We had lost too much. Our fleet was broken. Our soldiers were exhausted. Our people back home were asking questions that had no good answers. Why were we still fighting? What were we dying for? What would victory even mean? The humans accepted the peace offer? They did, Keth Varan said. But they had one condition. One demand that could not be negotiated. The collective had to publicly acknowledge what we had done. Every city we had burned, every civilian we had killed, every crime we had committed in the name of conquest. That must have been difficult for the council. It was humiliating, Keth Varan admitted. We had never apologized to any species we had conquered. We had never admitted wrongdoing, but the alternative was to continue a war we could no longer win, against an enemy that would never stop fighting. So we agreed. He was quiet for a moment, remembering the day the peace was announced, the strange silence that had fallen over the fleet. The feeling that something had ended that could never be restarted. I met Chris Miller in the final months of the war, Keth Varan continued. He was a prisoner. We had captured him during one of the last battles. He was in terrible condition. Starving. Beaten. Missing an arm. He had been through horrors I cannot even describe. Why are you telling me about him specifically? Keth Varan looked at her with something like wonder in his old eyes. Because he changed everything I believed about humans, about myself, about the universe. He leaned forward. I was assigned to guard the prisoners. By that point, I had no fight left in me. I did my duty without enthusiasm. I counted the days until I could go home. I tried not to think about anything at all. And then you met Chris Miller? And then I met Chris Miller, Keth Varan confirmed. He was in a cell by himself, too weak to stand most of the time. He should have hated me. He should have hated everything about me. I represented the enemy that had destroyed his world, killed his people, taken his arm. But he did not hate you? I do not know what he felt, Keth Varan said. But I remember the first time I spoke to him. I was bringing food to the prisoners. His cell was the last one in the row. When I opened the door, he looked up at me, and he smiled. Yanara frowned. He smiled at his captor. He smiled at me. Keth Varan said. I stood there, frozen. I did not know what to do. No prisoner had ever smiled at me. No enemy had ever looked at me with anything but fear or hatred. But Chris Miller smiled like I was an old friend he had not seen in a long time. His voice grew thick with emotion. I asked him why he was smiling. He said, because you look like you need it more than I do. Yanara felt tears running down her face. She did not bother to wipe them away. I did not understand. Keth Varan continued. I asked him what he meant. He said, you have been fighting this war for 11 years. You have seen terrible things, done terrible things. You look exhausted. You look lost. You look like someone who has forgotten why he is alive. He saw all that in your face? Humans are good at reading faces, Keth Varan said. Even alien faces. Chris Miller looked at me and saw something I had been hiding from myself. He saw my pain, my guilt, my despair, and he responded with compassion. He stood up and walked to the window one final time. The stars were bright now, filling the sky with cold light. I kept visiting him after that. I told myself it was part of my duties. But that was a lie. I visited him because talking to him made me feel less broken. He told me about his life before the war, his family, his dreams, the small town he had grown up in. He made me understand that humans were not just enemies. They were people. Complete, complicated people, with loves and fears and hopes. Did you become friends? I do not know if friend is the right word, Keth Varan said. How can a prisoner be friends with his guard? How can a victim be friends with someone who represents his oppressors? But there was something between us. Understanding. Perhaps. recognition that we were both broken creatures trying to survive. He turned back to face Yanara. On the day the peace was announced, I went to Chris Miller's cell one last time. I brought him water. Clean water. Not the recycled waste we usually gave prisoners. When I handed it to him, he looked at me, and he said 2 words. What did he say? Thank you. The words hung in the air between them. Simple words. Common words. But they carried the weight of everything Keth Voren had experienced. I broke down, he admitted. Right there in his cell. I collapsed against the wall and wept. I had not cried since I was a child. But hearing those words from that human, after everything we had done to him, after everything we had taken from him, something inside me shattered. Why did those words affect you so much? Because they proved that I had been wrong about everything, Keth Voren said. I had believed that strength meant conquest. That power meant domination. That victory meant crushing your enemies until nothing remained. But Chris Miller showed me a different kind of strength. The strength to suffer horribly and still offer kindness. The strength to lose everything and still hold on to your humanity. He sat back down, his old body heavy with exhaustion. We went to Earth as conquerors. We believed we were superior. We believed we had nothing to learn from these primitive creatures on their tiny blue world. But we were fools. The humans taught us more than we ever taught them. What did they teach you? They taught us that courage is not about winning, Keth Voren said. It is about standing up when you have already lost everything. They taught us that love is stronger than fear. That sacrifice is more powerful than survival. That a species willing to die for each other can never truly be defeated. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a photograph, worn and faded from years of handling. He handed it to Yanara. She looked at it. A human man, middle-aged, smiling at the camera. He was missing his left arm. Chris Miller, Keth Voren said. He survived the war. He went home to his small town. He rebuilt his life. And he writes to me. Every year, without fail, he sends me a letter telling me about his family, his grandchildren, his garden. He sends me pictures of Earth healing from the scars we left behind. You are still in contact with him? We have been writing to each other for 30 years, Keth Voren said. He was the first human I ever truly knew. And he became the reason I changed my life. He took the photograph back and looked at it for a long moment. After the war, I could not go back to being a soldier. I could not serve the collective anymore. Instead, I became a teacher. I spend my days telling young Velkorians about humans, about what they taught me, about why we should never again try to conquer a species just because we have the power to do so. You became an advocate for peace, Yanara said. I became an advocate for humility, Keth Voren corrected. We thought we were gods. We thought the galaxy belonged to us. Humans showed us that we were just another species. Flawed. Mortal. Capable of terrible cruelty and profound blindness. He stood up slowly, signaling that the interview was ending. You asked me why none of us returned the same. Now you know. We returned broken. We returned haunted. But some of us also returned wiser. We learned that strength without compassion is worthless. That victory without honor is defeat. That the smallest, weakest, most primitive species can still teach the mightiest empire in the galaxy what it truly means to be alive. Yanara turned off the recording device. Her hands were shaking. Thank you, she said. Thank you for sharing this. Keth Voren nodded. Thank you for listening. The truth about the human front deserves to be known. Not as propaganda, not as military history, but as a warning. And as a reminder. A reminder of what? The old soldier smiled. A tired and gentle expression that transformed his scarred face. A reminder that somewhere out there, on a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary star, there is a species that will never surrender. Never give up. Never stop fighting for the ones they love. And any empire foolish enough to threaten them will learn the same lesson we learned. He walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. Humans call themselves many things, But there is one phrase that captures who they truly are. One phrase that every veteran of that war knows by heart. What is it? Keth Varan's golden eyes gleamed in the starlight. Humanity, forever and always, no matter what. He opened the door and stepped out into the night, leaving Yanara alone with the weight of his memories and the echo of his words. The recording light blinked one final time, then went dark.